Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you for coming to our workshop on learning outcomes in the total person. And this is part one of a two-part series, and then we'll have some other follow-ups as well after this, building off of our all-faculty meeting that we had in April. To get started, we'll go ahead and ask Joshua Holt if he will say an opening prayer for us. Thank you, Joshua.
Yeah. Father in heaven, we're grateful this afternoon, the time we have to gather together virtually and participate in this workshop. We are grateful for the efforts of many across campus to revisit and reconsider the ways that the courses and outcomes and programs and things are being presented and looking to improve and refresh. Pray for the guidance of the Holy Ghost in our efforts as we learn today and work throughout the summer. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so part of the idea with this workshop today is building, like I said, building off of that meeting in April, and the idea of trying to address the aims in our teaching and learning. And more specifically, I know some of the conversations that have been going on for the last several months around the aims are, do we treat them as separate things, so that they each have their own separate learning outcomes, or how do we do that? And we are going to propose that we take, which is kind of also following up on the message from April, is to take a more integrated view of what that might look like. And so we'll just go ahead and dive in. Now, there are some parts of this where we're going to ask you to do a little bit of work on your own. And so prepare for that. I hope that's okay. I think it'll prove to be helpful. But let's start right here. This idea from the BYU Mission Statement that all instruction should make its own contribution toward the balanced development of the total person. And also kind of mirroring the message of our April meeting. This is from Elder Christofferson back in 2022, looking at the aims of a BYU education not as discrete objectives, but as a comprehensive whole, single overarching aim. So the idea again of thinking about them in a more integrated way, and how can we do that? Okay, so we might start by considering what we mean by the total person. Now, we could talk about all the different characteristics and attributes and probably spend an infinite amount of time talking about all of the facets of the total person. And doing that might not really get us where we want to go. And so one of the things that's really very helpful, is to have a framework that we can use to kind of structure our thinking and help us to approach a problem. So we're going to try and build a framework here of what the total person might look like, and how we might then be able to incorporate that into learning outcomes, but not just that, into teaching and learning. So we're going to start building our foundation or our framework on the foundation of agency, and this idea that agency is the capacity and power to think and act independently. Now, what we're going to do in part one is we're going to focus on the to think part, or we're going to say that this represents the inner person. and coming from our discipline, at least, of instructional psychology and psychology in general, there are these 4 domains of learning. And one of the things I want to pause here and make a little note is, in this integrative approach, one of the things that we believe and would advocate is that the gospel and our disciplines can be mutually reinforcing, and in fact that they can also, as we learn from one, they inform the other, and vice versa. And to the degree that we can find how they work together, I think that's very beneficial for us, especially in our role as faculty and in an academic setting. So we're going to explore this idea a little bit of how gospel and academic ideas come together and how we can use that for teaching and learning. So here we have these 4 domains. The one you're probably very familiar with is the cognitive domain, the thinking, reasoning, and so forth. Probably have heard of the psychomotor domain, which are the motor skills. They actually include what I'm doing right now, which is talking, and also writing and other forms of communication. And so one of the ways to look at that is the psychomotor domain is the domain that we use to make our agency manifest in the physical world. Another domain that you've probably heard of is affective. Normally that is talked about in terms of emotions or feelings, attitudes or opinions, and that's true, but there's another component that tends to get overlooked a little bit, and that is that the affective domain is the domain of value, of values, and value systems, and we're going to explore that a little bit more today. And the 4th domain, don't feel bad if you've never heard about this, because I have yet to run across someone who actually has, even in our own discipline, and that's the conative domain. It's been around since the beginning, but for cultural and other reasons, the emphasis has been on the cognitive, as I will show a little bit later. And so the conative domain has been there, and it's the domain of autonomy, self-regulation, and you might say agency as well too. And we'll explore that a little bit more today. Just for fun, to show you kind of and illustrate how, in fact, in education, we have maybe overemphasized the cognitive domain. Here are a couple of little things. One of these is on the left. This was a publication in 2024 sponsored by the American Psychological Association. It wasn't quite book length, but it was a series of articles or chapters. And it was on, again, future directions for education. And the cognitive domain was mentioned 523 times, and the affective only 5, and of course, nothing for the other 2. On the right, you see, again, the Google Scholar just did a search for these specific terms. And so this is how they're mentioned in scholarly publications. And we can see again that the cognitive domain is overwhelmingly featured, and the others descending down to very little for the conative domain. So I think this illustrates, again, like I say, perhaps that we're too invested in the cognitive domain, and maybe we need to pay a little bit more attention to a couple of the other domains. Now, again, like I mentioned, we'd like to connect this as well to gospel principles, and I believe that you can make a very good case that in D&C 4 and 2, it talks about serving God with all your heart, might, mind, and strength. And we can correlate those with these domains of psychology. The heart corresponding to the affective domain, might to the conative, might having a connotation of determination or will, also of moral strength. The mind, of course, with the cognitive, and strength with the psychomotor. So what we're going to do today then is take a look at bringing heart and might into our learning outcomes. And just to give you a little preview, because we're going to have you do some exercises after this that are going to help prepare you to do this for your own learning outcomes. But here is a little preview. On the left is this is from a real faculty member. Their first draft, as you notice, is very disciplinary and content oriented, tobacco, alcohol, and other addictions, and you're going to learn about those. The second draft, students will become empathetic and wise in engaging, assessing, and intervening with individuals, families, and communities that are struggling with the effects of addiction. I think you can already begin to see some ideas of how heart and might and this idea of what students will become is playing out in this second draft of the learning outcome. So what we're going to do now is dive right into some exercises. We'll give you a few more examples after we're done that will spur your thinking. But we want you to be thinking about some things that then you will be able to incorporate into your own learning outcomes. And so we'll start with the affective domain and the concept of value. And we're going to look at two perspectives of value. One is intrinsic value, the value in and of itself, and instrumental value, which is what can it do for, what can this do in the world? What can it do for me? So you'll see on the right here these illustrations of national parks, and they're good illustrations of both of these concepts because inside of these national parks, there are resources and things that we could use instrumentally to further our economy, to provide jobs, to do all kinds of things. And yet what we've done as a nation is we've decided that these areas have an intrinsic value that we want to preserve, and we want to preserve that for future generations. And so we're going to set them aside, and we're not going to use them instrumentally. We're going to just value them for what they are in themselves. And so with that in mind, those ideas in mind, let's proceed to a little activity here. So think about your discipline. What is the intrinsic value of your discipline? What is beautiful or inspiring? What is virtuous, lovely, of good report, or praiseworthy? And we're going to give you 3 minutes to write or type, or if you are in a place where you can't write or type, to go ahead and just ponder and reflect. What is the intrinsic value of my discipline? And go ahead and begin. Okay, if you could start wrapping up that thought. Okay, now what we'd like to do is give ourselves a little bit of time to share some of the thoughts that we had. And since we have a larger group and we kind of want to keep ourselves on track, we're going to set a little timer for us. But feel free, if you would like to share, what is the intrinsic value of your discipline? And let's go ahead and begin. Would like to share. And if you'd like to share in the chat, that would be fine too. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, I teach Student Development 109. That's effective study and learning. And what's some things that I realized is that learning is what we're here on earth to do. It's a major component of the plan of salvation. And in fact, the Doctrine and Covenants tells us that the glory of God is intelligence. And so as we gain learning and understanding, especially of truth, we grow in intelligence and we glorify God. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay.
Richard, we have 2 comments in the chat.
2 comments in the chat. Thank you, Ursula.
Miriam.
So from Miriam, language is inherently creative. Even people who don't think they are, don't think they are creative, create with language every day. From Matthew Jones, thermodynamics and heat transfer are key to power generation. This is an instrumental value. Understanding thermodynamics is key to understanding the universe, how power is generated from the flow of heat from high temperature to low temperature, and how the universe tends toward a low order state. Okay, and we've got Allison. Okay, coordinator of the Stewardship Lab, and the point is to help people in any discipline do interdisciplinary research. The work is all about supporting the intrinsic value of all living things and the earth itself. Okay, these are all good comments. Okay, and My timer stopped, but that's okay. We'll figure that we've had a good enough amount of time, I think. Now let's go ahead. We'll go ahead and move to the next exercise. Give ourselves a few minutes and consider what is the instrumental value of my discipline. So what can a person do with the discipline? How will it improve that person themselves? How will it help them contribute to and improve the communities? Or how will it help a person make a difference in the world? So what is your discipline good for? Go ahead and take 3 minutes to write, type, ponder, reflect, and we'll come back and discuss. Okay, and if you'll start wrapping up that thought. Okay, so let's go ahead and share. And again, chat's fine if you want to do chat, but we'll take a few minutes here. And what is the instrumental value of your discipline? What thoughts did you have? Go ahead, Mike. Get us started.
All right. Well, I'm going to keep it simple, but just based on the sign, the motto, or whatever of the university as you enter campus, enter to learn, go forth to serve. Learning allows people to become a benefit to their fellow man through applying what they've learned to serve. Now, not everybody does that. Some people use learning for selfish ends, but done well, learning leads to service and benefiting others. So, and of course, you know, skills that you can use in a profession and stuff like that too.
So we've got a couple of entries in the chat here. So David says, my discipline is information science, helps us swim through the flood of information, discern truth from error, lay hold of all good things. From Miriam, understanding how language works can help us understand others and work more effectively with them. Yeah, also very good, right? Understanding language can also help us understand ourselves as we think, often in terms of language too, right? It is interesting that one of the things that really does help us is if we can learn a different vocabulary that helps us think about a specific thing, we can actually now do things with that because of the vocabulary that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. That's an interesting thing, I think. So let me make a little comment here. I want you all to think back when you were a student and you were deciding on where you wanted to go with your life. And you're probably in different classes. This could have been high school or even college or whatever. And I'm guessing that somewhere along the way, that the discipline that you're in, you found something intrinsically valuable about that discipline, something that was inspiring or beautiful to you. But more than that, you probably also recognized that this was going to be an avenue where you could actually put some of your talents and interests to work and accomplish something and contribute. And, you know, that question is actually, especially the instrumental question, because that's the one that comes to the fore most often when, you know, is what am I going to do with this? But think about that with your students who are walking into your class, that question of value, what is the value of what I'm learning, both to myself, but also to the world around me? What will I be able to do with it? That's an important question. And if students can answer that question, or if you can help them and provide an answer to that question, they are much more likely to be engaged in your courses and actively participating in learning. Okay, let's move on to another part of the affective domain, which is values and value system. So each one of our disciplines has a set of values, and those are usually organized in some way, whether we know it or not. They're usually organized in some way into a value system. Now, generally speaking, what seems to happen most often in education is that we kind of assume that students will just pick up the values or that they've already acquired them from somewhere. And all we need to do is teach them the stuff of our discipline, and they'll somehow seem to absorb the values. But this is also another good thing that we really ought to be explicit about in our teaching and learning. So think about the values of your discipline. What is good or true? How do you evaluate yourself? Okay, and we're going to do another exercise here. What are the values? How are they organized into a value system? And we're also going to ask you then to consider how these values connect to the values of the gospel of Jesus Christ, and how they might be informed by, affirmed by, or related to these gospel-centered values. So we'll take another 3 minutes and begin. Okay, if you could start wrapping up that thought. Let's go ahead and do a little sharing. I'll go ahead and get us started a little bit here. Some thoughts that I had. For example, one of the values that is pretty ubiquitous is the value of authorship, or as we might say, of not plagiarizing. And you know, that's it's interesting because that's been an issue for a number of years now, as I've been watching the conversation in teaching and learning, that today's students don't have the same concept of plagiarism that most of us do, and sharing to them is a lot more normal than it is to most of us. And so here's a value that we think should be obvious, right? But yet actually it's one that we need to teach students and that they need to learn. And so there's a value and a part of our value system. Anybody else like to share? Got one in the chat from Matt Jones. In D&C 58, where we are told that the earth is full and there is enough to spare. We are faced with challenges regarding the availability of energy resources. We can trust God's promise and know that through study and faith, we can find a way to generate the power we need using the resources that are available. Okay, so there's a value. Oh, one more in the chat. All languages, like all people, have value, and using a language imperfectly does not lower a person's value. Well, that's a good one. So there's a hierarchy of values. People are more important than their ability or lack thereof with language. Okay, so consider these ideas. Anybody have anything about how your values in your discipline connect to the gospel of Jesus Christ? I guess that was one of the things that Matt shared, actually connecting God's promise that there's enough and to spare. Okay. Go ahead, Mike.
I'll try to keep it really brief, but in learning, we actually value desirable difficulties and effort. And President Nelson said the Lord loves effort. And those efforts lead to growth and progress, which are part of the gospel of Christ. He's trying to, his atonement is there so that we can overcome our mistakes and weaknesses and grow and progress. And and just the intrinsic value of each individual, taking it to the gospel perspective. You know, each of us is a child of God, and thus have intrinsic value, but that growth through effort and desirable difficulties is a good thing that helps us come closer to God and become like Him.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Okay, let's go ahead and we're going to move now into the conative domain, that might side of things, and look at this idea of autonomy and self-regulation. And have you consider the questions and phrase it this way: what is the discipline of my discipline? We call it a discipline for a reason, right? Because there are certain ways that we're supposed to be, certain expectations on what we do and how we do it, what we think, how we communicate, all of those kinds of things. I'm going to offer the suggestion, the idea that really what we're trying to teach our students is this: the discipline of the discipline. And it's not so in reality. And one of the reasons that we get a little frustrated sometimes is that when we're teaching the material or the content of our discipline, we're not always seeing students learning the discipline of the discipline. So let's go ahead and take 3 minutes for you to kind of contemplate this and think about these questions. How are you supposed to regulate yourself inside your discipline? Or how do you act autonomously? What are the expectations for how you conduct yourself, how you communicate, so on and so forth? Take 3 minutes and go. Okay, so my timer got a little messed up. I'm not sure how much messed up it got, but why don't we go ahead and wrap that up? I think it's probably about right. And let's again share with the group, what is the discipline? What are the ways that a student or a learner or someone is supposed to behave, think, act inside of your discipline? So obviously back to the same idea of authorship, right? We want people to do their own work. That would be one of the ways that we would expect them to behave. Let's see, we've got entry in the chat. How does a person engage with an engineers develop predictive models of systems and processes? We need to understand that models are all approximate. So predictions based on these models are approximate. Students should not focus on whether the answer is right, but on how good is their answer and how do they know how good their answer is. Okay, that's a good one. Okay. Back to the notion of values. I missed this one from David. We value truthfulness, preservation of knowledge, access to knowledge by all God's children. Okay. Okay, from Miriam, there are a lot of ways to engage in linguistics, and people need to be careful to value the other ways of engaging and not belittle other subfields as less valuable or linguistics light. Okay. Autonomy. Recognize that we can be active contributors to the scholarly conversation. Okay, that's a good one. Okay. So here again, kind of from the student perspective, this is what they're hoping to do, right? Is to actually be learning, what kind of person am I going to be? How do I act? How do I engage in this community, right? With this group of people within this discipline. And so I'd say again, keep thinking about these ideas after this workshop is done and start thinking about how you can incorporate them into your teaching and learning. So I'm going to run back really fast. I'm going to go back to this slide. Excuse me. Where did we go here? Right there. Okay. So given our discussions, I want to just take a quick look again. Here's this first draft, right? A nice academic, this is what we're going to talk about. This is what you're going to learn about tobacco, alcohol, and other addictions. And let's take a look at the second draft again and think, okay, now in terms of values, and engagement in the discipline, do I start to see some ideas of this coming forth in this second draft? That there's a value, certainly a value of helping with addiction, right? That's a valuable thing to do. That there's some notion that you're going to be able to intervene because of what you've learned, and that you're going to become a more empathetic and wise person through your experience in this course. So we can already start to see that embedded within our disciplines, these are not separate things. We don't have some religious ideas over here and academic ideas over here, and they don't mix and they're oil and water. Not at all. These values very often are very complementary. Certainly empathy is a part of the gospel of Jesus Christ, wisdom and so forth, right? And we want to bless the lives of others. So part of the idea here is to try and show these things as a whole, as this unified whole, that our discipline as well contains all of these elements as well. And so we approach our discipline as a unified whole while we're approaching students as a unified person. So let's skip forward here now back to some other examples. Okay, now let me just say, I understand that there is kind of a suggested, some might say prescribed format for learning outcomes. And I'm perfectly fine with that. I think there's some very good things from that format, to follow that format. But by the same token, I'm going to say that the best learning outcome is the one that is meaningful to you and meaningful to your students. And if it doesn't exactly fit the suggested format, that's probably going to be okay. Okay, and so that, as you see these examples, you'll see that format also varies a little bit here. And so I'm not putting these forward as the definitive examples, but these are real examples from real faculty that are trying to incorporate some of these ideas into integrating it into teaching and learning. So here's from statistics. Students will be able to evaluate claims, advance knowledge, and seek revelation through the appropriate use of quantitative methods of inquiry. Now, we might not normally think of statistics and revelation in the same, moment, but actually, when you stop and think about it, you have to kind of say, wait a minute, oh, wait a minute, actually, these are pathways to revelation. Here again, mixed inside the discipline. So this is from Spanish literature. Students will view the current and historical struggle of humanity with light and darkness through the beauty and complexity of Spain as a nation of conquerors, Catholics, and creators, and apply this lens to the complexity in their own communities and lives. So originally this was a lot of, here it's kind of about you were going to read a lot about the major authors in Spanish literature. But now we're putting this into the context of what is it you can learn about yourself and learn about humanity through this experience that you're going to have in Spanish literature. From philosophy, students will be able to integrate philosophical principles, knowledge, and skills with religious and moral convictions to solve theoretical, practical, and ethical problems. And so here we've got some intrinsic values, or some values with some instrumental value in being able to solve problems. Math education. Graduates seek integrity between their personal and professional lives consistent with the restored gospel of Jesus Christ by recognizing all students as children of God and striving to nurture their divine potential. Now, this one is a little bit longer, so I shortened it a little bit, but I just, again, trying to show that that here inside of math education, there's the value, the intrinsic value of all students as children of God, and the value of striving to nurture their divine potential, which would indeed be part of that educational process, right? Nursing, students will integrate the principles of the gospel of Jesus Christ as part of clinical judgment, caring holistically for diverse individuals, families, communities, and populations, personal health and well-being, and lifelong learning. So just to wrap up here, what you see here is our graphical representation of our framework for the total person. What we've talked about today is that inner person, the heart, might, mind, and strength. Our next session in a couple of weeks, we'll talk about the outward manifestation in terms of individuality, community and unity, and stewardship, and how we can start to incorporate some of those ideas as well into our learning outcomes, as well as into our teaching and learning. With that, I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to open it up to the floor. We're at 1:53, so if you need to leave to go to class, I understand. If you've got a few more minutes, we can share some comments, ask questions, discuss. Any thoughts from anybody? Yes, the slides will be available. Both of these sessions are being recorded, so you can also rewatch the workshop as well.
Can you show that last slide again, just so we can kind of study it a little bit more?
Sure. Okay, well, thank you for your participation today and taking time out of a Friday afternoon on a wonderful summer day. I believe we've got a little 1 or 2 question survey for you at the end, if you wouldn't mind filling that out as you leave. And we hope to see you in a couple of weeks for the next session. Thanks. Okay, bye-bye.